webinar. Today's webinar presenter will be Ken Weston. He's our field CISO here at Panther. He'll be joining us today to walk us through how to ditch essentially your legacy SIEM and help you upgrade to a more modern SIEM that provides real-time visibility from day one and really helps start detecting your first threat in less than an hour. Before we get started, just a couple housekeeping items. All lines have been muted, so if you have a question, please put it in the Q&A chat and we will answer them during our Q&A portion at the end of our presentation. Keep in mind that we will be sending you all relevant links after the event that have been mentioned throughout the webinar. And with that, I'll turn it over to Ken to give us a little bit of an intro to himself.
Hi there, my name's Ken Weston. I'm a field CISO here at Panther. I've been involved in security for about 15 years or so. Spent about 4 years at Splunk as their first security specialist, as well as about 3 years at Elastic, where I led security strategy. So I'm quite familiar with SIEM and really excited to share with you what I've been learning about Panther in my 8 months here.
Awesome, thanks, Ken. We'll be launching a little bit of a quick poll here to kind of get us a little bit engaged and started. First poll up is, what SIEM do you have experience with? We have a couple choices from Panther, Splunk, Elastic, QRadar, Sumo Logic, Devo, and other. And if you've had experience with multiple ones, feel free to answer those as well. Wow, looks like we have a lot of people on the line that have experience with Splunk. Got Splunk, Elastic following up. Couple Panther users on the line. Shout out to them. We have a couple also in others. Awesome.
I've been running this poll for a few times, particularly when we run workshops, and a lot of folks have experience with Splunk. It's usually, I think, the kind of the predominant one that's out there. And I'm actually a big fan of Splunk. I was there for about 4 years, and I really appreciate, particularly when you don't know what data sources you're trying to ingest, is really useful for that. Some of the challenges are, of course, particularly when you start looking at scaling and some of the costs associated with it. I think that's probably the one thing we hear the most is the cost for the licensing, as well as the maintenance. You actually have to have almost like a full-time staff just managing the data infrastructure. So look forward to talking to you guys a little bit more about why Panther is a little bit different than Splunk, and also can answer questions too about how they can actually work together. So we got through our poll, and I think we're going to discuss the agenda.
Yeah, I think I kind of mentioned a little bit earlier on from it. Today's agenda is set up where we'll be walking through on how to really help you unlock total visibility from your SIEM without breaking the bank, really help you drive accuracy and learn about how to do reliability with the concept detections as code, help you increase threat coverage without adding any operational overhead, and then helping you also help choose the right SIEM that grows as your data needs grow as well.
Great. All right, we'll get started here. So yes, one thing I've noticed over the last probably 10 years or so in security, particularly when it comes to SIEM, is if you look at the history of SIEM, and I think right now ArcSight is probably the oldest SIEM that's out there on the market. It's over 2 decades old. And when it came into existence, really, there was 2 different components of SIEM. There was SIM, which was Security Information Management, and you had SEM, which was Security Event Management. Now, SIM, with the information management, was more dealing with log aggregation. So a lot of use cases around compliance, around PCI at the time. And then you also had event management, which was basic correlation when you're maybe correlating firewalls with some Windows endpoint telemetry. But it really wasn't that sophisticated. It didn't really need to be, because we were dealing with very simple network architectures. I'm not sure if you remember back in the day when people used to drive into offices. They actually worked in offices, and you had data centers and things like that. That's where a lot of the SIEMs were really designed for, really to protect that sort of corporate security and the corporate perimeter. However, at that time, we said, well, we need SIEM because we needed to protect our data. So really, it came into existence because data has a security problem. But one thing we're running into now, particularly as we migrate to the cloud, is that now I'm seeing the high volume of log that are getting generated from cloud applications. If you look at CloudTrail, for example, a lot of times people can't even bring that into their SIEM. Their technical budget doesn't match up. It can cost millions of dollars to try to ingest some of that data and annual license fees. You also have technical constraints. Although a lot of these sort of legacy SIMs, they'll say that they can actually scale. It can be a bit of a challenge for them. You have to re-architect things depending on the throughput. So if you have a higher velocity log sources, they need to be in different indexes versus maybe one that's not as noisy. So there's a lot of these sort of trade-offs that have to happen as a result of that. So that's kind of why I always say SIM exists because data has a security problem. But now I really do believe that SIM has a data problem. That's one of the reasons I really liked Panther when I saw them. I was able to play with the tool. I really like the fact that we can actually apply real-time detections, which is very difficult to do in some of the legacy SIMs where you actually have to have the data indexed and then you're running safe searches and things like that. So again, there's these sort of trade-offs that occur when this happens. So you have to decide: do we want to have visibility, or do we need to get rid of our budget? Right. So it's a really a thing that really shouldn't have to happen. A lot of times, organizations maybe they'll bring some of their data into an on-prem SIM, and then they'll leverage some of the cloud tools that are available for logging and searching, but they're not particularly robust. Some of them you also have to learn a proprietary query language. Some of them also require higher licensing fees, such as like an E5 license with Microsoft to get access to some of their security tools. So there can be a bit of a challenge. And also, I find a lot of times those different tools, they don't necessarily play well with other cloud infrastructure. So, for example, trying to bring Gmail logs into Azure and then into Sentinel, that can be really difficult to do. I think you need to be like a Mensa member to be able to figure it out. It's incredibly complex to be able to do that. Then you also have the excessive operational costs that are associated with some of those SIMs. Again, you oftentimes hire a bunch of security analysts to mitigate threats to your organization. But then what happens when half your team spends all of their day just managing the tools that you're trying to work with, whether it's managing the data infrastructure, managing backups and things like that. So there's a bit of a challenge there. And I think a lot of times when people are going into the SIM, especially if it's their first SIM, a lot of these sort of costs catch them by surprise. And so you end up fighting this sort of uphill battle where you're trying to mitigate these threats while you're also fighting your tools. And so again, because of that, we end up with a lot of blind spots. We may actually miss really critical alerts that are actually happening within our environment. So when it comes to security data, I always like to leverage the 3 V's of big data. We discuss volume, right? So the high volume, particularly when we're dealing with cloud log sources, I really saw a big uptick in this when we had the pandemic. A lot of organizations ended up being forced into cloud, whether they liked it or not. They maybe had a plan, like a 5-year plan, but now they had to move really rapidly to get that implemented within months. And when they did that, there's also a lot of talent issues as well, because you may know how to do security for a perimeter, but cloud security is a little bit of a different beast. You also started bringing in a lot more SaaS applications like Zoom and things like that as well. And a lot of times people don't necessarily know what threats to look for in some of those particular log sources. And so we also have the velocity challenge. And so these log sources are coming in at a higher, faster rate. Being able to respond to them in real time or near real time is critically important. You can't sit there and wait for 2 hours for some safe search to complete, right? If you can actually apply real-time detections like we can in Panther, we can actually identify that threat and we can act on it immediately. We can even send that particular alert to any destination of your choosing. We can even send it to a SOAR platform. You can open Jira tickets depending on the log source, the event type. There's a lot of flexibility that you have with that. But also being able to send that to maybe a script with a custom webhook as well to automate a process, maybe to spin up another EC2 instance, something like that. That's definitely something that Panther is really well designed to do. You also have variety. So the log sources that we're dealing with, there's a lot of different data sources we're trying to bring in. We have a lot of different schemas. One thing with Panther is it's very easy for us to build schemas on the fly. You can actually build custom schemas as well. It's actually one of our top log sources is custom, because we have a lot of people that are more in the DevOps space that are leveraging our SIM for their use cases. So some of the challenges with modern SIM, with other SIMs, is you usually have to have this challenge with ingesting all the data. Again, you had to manage hot, warm, cold buckets, and that can be a bit of a pain for a lot of organizations. I've been a little spoiled at Panther, particularly running workshops where I'm throwing data into our security data lake, and I don't even have to think about the indexes. We get 1 year of full data retention out of the box, so I don't even need to worry about my 30, 60, 90-day retention, right? And not only is that 1 year of data retention, that's 1 year of searchable data retention. Now, if you think about use cases like around insider threat for investigations, for example, this is going to be really, really helpful. And it can be incredibly expensive to have 1 year of data retention in some of these other platforms. Also being able to auto scale. When we apply our real-time detections, we're leveraging AWS Lambda, and that scales automatically. Also on the back end, it's basically infinite data source. So it doesn't matter how much data you're throwing into your SIEM with Panther, you're going to be able to search those logs and leverage it. So how does this apply into the incident response lifecycle? So I've been teaching a purple teaming workshop. It's actually been a ton of fun because what we're able to do is we actually run offensive operations against a Nocta instance. And with that, we end up generating logs. And that allows us to test out our existing detections, but it also allows us to develop a hypothesis for new detections that we might have missed, particularly when you're dealing with an incident. Being able to leverage that as a postmortem, that's great when you have real security incidents, or if someone else has an incident, like we maybe saw with Microsoft recently with the key issue, right? Other cloud providers might start looking at how can we mitigate on that particular threat? Is there a particular detection that we can write? So it's really important to be able to leverage postmortems, be able to do purple teaming, leverage red teaming exercises as well, so that we can actually test our detections. Also, when it comes to testing, Panther is great because we can actually run unit tests. We can actually get a sample log file. We can test our detection before we even think about moving it into a production environment. And then, of course, the response side of things too is not all responses are going to be equal. A lot of times, legacy SIEMs, they're expecting you to have eyes on glass, and you're going to be manually going through sort of like a ticketing system. But being able to leverage automation is critically important in today's modern SIEM environment. There's a lot of things that we can do that we don't necessarily need to have an analyst review. We can automate a lot of those processes. So again, they can focus on identifying the real threats to the organization. Also being able to leverage what we refer to as detection as code. So I really love Panther because I can write detections in Python. I am really proficient in other query languages like SPL, EQL. I can use them really well, but being able to have access to the entire Python library, you can actually get really creative with your detections. It's not often that we get to be creative in security. But there's a lot of really amazing things you can do, particularly leveraging conditional logic and things where I can actually write one detection that'll actually maybe cover 5 to 10 different Sigma rules, for example, which are fairly static. So again, leveraging that concept with code, we also apply software development concepts to that as well. So if we want to roll back code, we can do that very easily, leveraging Panther and the Panther analysis tool. You can also leverage GitHub Actions or CI/CD tools, things like that as well. We're really well attuned, particularly for those sorts of dev environments. So something to consider. So I think we're going to have another quick poll. Is that right?
Yep. Awesome. Curious to hear on the call, do you currently use detection as code when you're creating and managing your detections? A couple of minutes or a couple of seconds, I should say. Nice. We have a little bit of a mix of an audience. Some have used it, some haven't, some are just getting started. That's really great to hear. I think we'll dive in a little bit in the next slide to kind of give you a little bit more about how detection as code really works.
That's great. It was interesting though. It was the yeses were ahead and then the no's caught up. So I think people are very passionate about detection as code, the folks that are using it. That's great. So yeah, detection as code, it's great to be able to leverage, again, a lot of the software development kind of processes and procedures that you might use. Being able to clone a repo, be able to create branches, really interact with it, particularly using GitHub, leveraging things like GitHub Actions, really great for establishing workflow. One challenge I've seen with some legacy SIEMs is that you may have someone like a junior analyst or maybe an intern that goes in and modifies a particular detection or a safe search. And all of a sudden, I've seen the SOC get flooded with false positives. When that happens, they don't know, like, are we actually under attack? Or they look at the detection and they don't see who actually made that modification. Or they have to be able to figure out, what that change was so they can change it back quickly. Being able to have version control in your detections is really critically important. It also allows you to automate a lot of your processes too for deploying those detections really rapidly into your production environments. Now, this is really helpful, particularly when we're dealing with situations where there might be 0-day exploits. Maybe we get new detections from our community, right? So it's really important to be able to leverage those concepts of speed, automation, as well as establish a workflow for your detections. And most of the teams I've seen that have moved to this type of a model are much happier with their processes. They have much more efficiency around writing their detections. They're able to bring better metrics as well to the business around those detections as well. It's very different than buying a SIM off the shelf, enabling all of the out-of-the-box detections, and then hoping that it catches everything. Hope isn't a very good security strategy anymore. And so, again, leveraging detection as code is going to allow you to do these really interesting things. So kind of what I like to think about, this is a kind of like a type of attack that we use in our purple teaming exercise, where I like to think in terms of the Lockheed Martin kill chain, right? The sort of path an attacker goes through when they're actually conducting their attacks. So looking at things like passwords brain, like brute force, being able to identify that. Now that's a detection where your response can be automated. You can block an IP address or reset a password, things like that. That's an alert that doesn't necessarily need to have someone in the SOC actually have eyes on it before you actually take an action. Then you can get into situations where you maybe have a compromised admin account, and I'll show you an example of that in a minute here in the demo. And then you also have like maybe an API key gets generated. I find that usernames and password are like so 2000s right now. If I can get an access token or API keys, that's going to be much more beneficial to me as an attacker. It's a lot easier for me to do more nefarious things, such as maybe create new users to establish persistence in an environment and escalate those privileges as well. And being able to actually monitor and track those changes are going to be critically important for us to mitigate the threat. So I'm going to jump into our demo here. Just give me a moment to switch screens. Alrighty, so you guys should all see my screen here. So when you first log into Panther, you see that there are a number of different dashboards. So we can see alerts as they're coming in. We can see their level of severity. We can also send those alerts again to a Jira if we want to create tickets, things like that as well. We can see which kind of the level of severity, kind of where their status is. We can also look at the health of our data if we want to as well. Everything's going okay here. But then one really great thing is leveraging our security data lake as well. I can go in here and I can very easily search the recent logs of what's happening in my environment. If I want to search Okta, for example, I just ran a workshop yesterday, so of course I have some fresh logs. So this is great. So this is sort of the key concept of what we have with our security data lake. And then we also have our ability to write detections. And we have a number of different detections. And we have a lot of them that are out of the box. I think we're up to almost over 500 detections now. And we have them organized into packs. But we can also very easily onboard data. So for example, if I want to bring in Okta, which is my example here, if I want to look here, I can see all the different log sources that we're able to ingest already. If I do a search for Okta, I can load this in here. I can very easily do my setup. All I need to do is type in a name and my subdomain, which is this here for my dev environment. And then for my API token, I can very easily just go into security. I go under API. I go into tokens. and I create a new token. Very easily copy that to my clipboard. And I paste this in and I click setup. I don't need to do that because I already have this data flowing in, but that's how fast you can actually onboard data into Panther. Like that's unheard of, I think, in some other SIMs, trying to deal with different agents maybe that are required, forwarders, things like that. We're able to leverage the API keys very easily, and we're able to onboard that data pretty rapidly. Now, if I go in, I've already got the data loaded and it's flowing in here. If I look at the Okta pack, we can see that there are a number of rules that just come out of the box. This is one of my favorites, the Okta API key created. I can actually look at my code here, but what we start with all of our detections is the actual log file. So when I'm in my secure data lake, I can copy the JSON. I paste it right here into my unit test environment, and then I can also then start writing my code. Now, a lot of times people get really intimidated sometimes with writing Python. Maybe they're not a Python guru, but actually with Panther, we actually have a lot of helper functions. So even though you're writing detections in Python, you're not having to write like an application from scratch. We have a lot of functions that are available for you. And a lot of these are in this base helpers, Panther-based helpers library. We use deep-get quite a bit in all of our workshops. We can also have some that are specific to a particular data source. You can also create your own helpers. So if you find that you want to do more code reuse, particularly when you're collaborating with a larger team, maybe you have a function that goes out and pings an external API or something like that. That's a great example of where you maybe can put that into a shared type of code library. So I highly recommend that. When it comes to writing rules, the only function that's actually required is this rule event, and just indicates if we're going to run that particular detection or not. The rest are optional, where we can actually modify the title. We can also pass in additional information for the alert context and sort of key value pairs. So don't get intimidated with writing detection as code or with Python. If you are interested, we do teach multiple workshops. We have a couple of coming up. We have a purple teaming one, as well as another one where we actually look at the software supply chain, where we look at GitHub as a particular data source. So I highly recommend, if you are interested in learning more, if you want to overcome your fear of Python, I recommend that you sign up for those. Happy to get you in there. We can also run a private one if you have a company. I'm more than happy to do that as well with your team, to walk you through this whole process as well. So this is sort of what we have for our detection. I want to show you where I can actually run a test as well. So if I made any modifications, oops, it's not going to work. Yeah, just whatever. It should be okay. I can run a replay. I'm just running my test there. So there we go. We have the API key created. We can see that this is working. Now I can go ahead and I can deploy this to production. And if I want to as well, if I wanted to clone this versus, I didn't want to monkey with the existing code, I can actually clone it and create my own version of this as well. I can disable this one. That way I always have the original. But, it's really up to you. That's kind of the great thing about detection as code, is really the flexibility that's going to provide to you. And that's it for the demo. I'm going to hand it off back to Nadia. Slides.
Thanks everyone for joining our webinar. Again, modern security teams run Panther. They love us. We're cloud native, zero ops, high scalable, detections as code. And best of all, we help lower your SIM cost by about 50%. We'll be dropping a link to our request demo page. If you're ready to talk to our team, we'll be able to give you a little bit more of a customized demo based off of your environment. Outside of that, I want to thank everyone for attending, and thanks again for giving us the presentation. We'll be sending out the recording along with a link to a few of our resources and a follow-up email. Outside of that, I completely forgot about our Q&As. My bad, everyone. We got a couple of questions. First one we'll do in the Q&A. What integrations, MDR, network, IM, does Panther ingest data from?
We don't right now. I'm not sure if we have. We're working with many MDRs. We can. The nice thing about Panther is that it's all API based, so it's very easy for us to integrate with if you wanted to with an Arctic Wolf or something like that. We do integrate with a lot of EDR tools such as CrowdStrike, SentinelOne, and others. So if you are bringing those tools in, we can not only ingest those data and apply the kind of pass-through detections, we can also correlate that with other detections as well. For network telemetry, we support a lot of the tools that are out there, like Zeek, Bro, good friends of mine, things like that as well. You can actually see all of the integrations on our website that we support. You can also see it in the product itself. There's quite a few. There's a growing list of solutions that are there. And then we have another question here. How do you handle correlation for detections that require multiple log sources of events to detect, such as password sprays, pivoting, etc.? There are some things that we can do. We have ways of actually saving state, particularly when it comes around identity or entities. There's ways that we can do that through a DynamoDB database. There's other ways we can also save sort of state of some of those detections as well. I'm happy to walk you through that. If you want to sign up for a demo, we can have one of our solution engineers walk you through that process. Particularly some of the stuff that they've been doing lately, particularly around risk-based alerting, is really interesting. So would love to show you that. And does Panther integrate with a ticketing system or Slack? Actually, yes, we do. We integrate with pretty much every ticketing system out there. We also have a Slack bot. So not only can we send data into Slack, we can also ask questions. So maybe if you have a user that logged in an Okta from Portland, Oregon, and then 20 minutes later logged in from Moscow, we can go ahead and ask them, did you log in from this? Yes or no? And then we can take an action based on that response. And then also we use Jira ourselves, so we actually send into that. You also have a custom webhook. So if you want to send it into some sort of custom tool that you've built, there was that question around like an MDR or an MSSP. If an MDR or MSSP were to use this, that's something that they could also leverage as well.
Awesome. And it looks like we have two more that came in through the webinar chat. Does detection of this code help to test on test data, which is not going to affect the production load?
I'm sorry, what was the question? I didn't see that.
Does detection of this code help to test on test data, which is not going to affect the production load?
Yes, very much so. Yeah, we can actually, if you do our Code to Cloud workshop, we even show how you can bring in multiple tests. We can even have a negative test as well. So we're not actually having to run that through our production environment. One thing we can also do too is data replay. So if you write your detection, you can actually rerun like 30 days worth of historical data against that detection as well, which is another great way to test your detections.
And then one other one, can you implement a pack and turn off certain ones?
Yes.
And then Jeffrey has another one. What is the true positive percentage using Panther? Does detections as code reduce the noise than other SIEMs?
I know everyone hates this answer, but it depends. That's really the truth here. But it does reduce false positives quite a bit. We actually have a couple of blog posts around some best practices around this as well, and ways you can actually decrease your false positive rate. So we can send that along as well. But yeah, I think it definitely increases. I think particularly having access to the Python library, I can get a lot more specific around my detection, particularly when we start talking as well about saving state, like leveraging things like DynamoDB, things like that. You can get a lot more granular with your detection. So, I think the more granular you can get with your detection, the more quality alerts you're going to get as a result. Great.
Awesome. Any other questions? If not, we can wrap this up. As I was saying earlier, thanks everyone for attending. We appreciate you taking the time to join from all around the world. Hope to have a great rest of your day or night. And thanks again for joining us.